we're just going to round off quickly. We're not going to have a prolonged panel discussion, but really just some concluding thoughts. And I asked 4 Imajine colleagues just really to think about some concluding thoughts in response to where spatial justice research might go further. So Tialda and Rhys, Apostolos, and also Lionel will join us online. So if you'd like to come up to the front, and basically, I'm just asking you I've asked them to speak for no more than 5 minutes in terms of just thinking about where spatial justice thinking might go, research might go. And I don't know, where should we start? We'll start in the middle, to be unconventional, with Rhys.
Lovely. Thanks, Mike. Well, I think I've taken this in terms of, quite literally maybe, in terms of where next for spatial justice research. It may be another way of phrasing it might be where next for Imajine, and is there an Imajine 2 this time? It's personal or something along those lines. But certainly for me, I think I would say that Imajine has been very good in terms of conceptualizing spatial justice. I think it's been very good as well in terms of understanding inequalities. Maybe I may be controversial here in saying that maybe where we could move forward and do something in the future is by examining almost the implementation of spatial justice more fully, I think. And I think, to me, I think there are a series of challenges there that need to be examined, and particularly in relation to the implementation of spatial justice at a local and regional level by local and regional states. First of all, I think there's a whole issue around the way in which spatial justice augments and expands the objects of government. We've told a story about Wales and the shift there from EU cohesion policies emphasizing GDP, moving forward with the Well-being of Future Generations Act, which now has 7 well-being goals defined by the people of Wales, 47 national indicators of progress towards well-being. And those include things like percentage of people who are at least moderately happy in their jobs. Hands up, who's moderately happy in their jobs, or at least moderately happy? Not many, so I think we've got some work there to do. But, it raises the whole issue there about the legitimate object of government. All of a sudden, government is interested in these kinds of questions, and it does raise a series of issues there around complexity. I think different kind of complexity to the one that Sean was talking about earlier on, but a whole series of issues around the complexity of government when you're starting to get involved in a whole range of different issues that you wouldn't have gone anywhere near in the past. Is it legitimate to do so? Where is the legitimate object? How far should government extend into our everyday lives? And a whole series of implications arising there in terms of the implementation of a spatial justice approach. What is the legitimate object of government? A second set of issues, and we've had some references to this already in the discussion today, around maybe administrative and bureaucratic capacity to engage in these issues as well. There was a story last week about the UK's levelling up agenda and the fact that some of the poorer parts of the UK, that the Conservative government were desperate to give them money, but basically they weren't able to complete the forms to access that money in a good enough way, and because of that they didn't receive any money. And it raises a whole series of issues there around the capacity to engage with a new spatial justice agenda. What kind of training do people need? What kind of training do public servants need in order to be able to think in a different way, to move beyond GDP, to incorporate different aspects of life into policy making and into their considerations about how to improve the quality of life in the areas that they are governing. And finally, I suppose the third issue I wanted to mention quickly was moving beyond and challenging, if you like, the territorial aspect of local and regional states. As Anna said earlier on, to forget boundaries. And how do we do that? To what extent can we encourage local and regional states to think in more relational ways? We've already heard today that spatial justice, territorial inequality is very much a relational kind of concept. And how do we encourage local and regional states to think in those more relational ways, considering the inequalities within their own regions, but also inequalities between their regions and other parts of the world, other parts of Europe. Now, Ashamin, ages ago now, was talking about the need to move beyond a politics of propinquity. In other words, a politics where we were just worried about what was next to us, what was near to us, what was adjacent to us, to think about a politics of connectivity. How can we connect our way of thinking with other regions, maybe quite near to us, but very distant from us in some cases? And how can that enable us then to develop new connections, new ways of aiding regions, of developing solidarity in that respect? So a whole series of issues that we could consider there as well.
Thank you. Okay, I'll try to pose some points as well. I think especially the second point you made with our local governments and local regions able to actually deal with all this is very relevant. So I was really wondering a little bit whether our big society ideal is actually working well, and maybe we should actually go for a welfare state 2.3.0 or whatever. Maybe we need some more like top-down or national level, action there. I'm not sure, but I was just thinking about that. One of the things related to our work package on migration, some topics for future research I would feel would be in terms of labor migration. I think I made the point already a little bit this morning. It would be nice to think a little bit more about the shortage of labor and the demand for international labor migrants that will increase enormously in the next decades, but it's already now increasing after we recover from COVID, or at least we try to. Future research could address what can be done to help sending regions and also the migrants themselves to profit more from the out-migration now that they are much more in need. So they should be able to make more a voice, but it doesn't really work yet in terms of waging higher wages or better housing and living circumstances, but also in terms of remittances to sending regions and localities. So not so much individuals in those areas, but the regions or the localities from the receiving regions. So what can we do? What can be done to empower these regions so that they can enforce this? How can policy and governments and also employers in receiving regions, so who receive the international migrants, do something to the development and the quality of life to improve that in the sending regions that lose human capital because of the labor migration, because of the territorial inequalities in the whole system. So I think it would be very interesting to look at that so that we can prevent that the regions that are already behind will fall further behind because of the loss of human capital. Another related question is whether Western European labor markets should be adapted to get rid of the work that the internal local people do not want to do, and that we need the international migrants for. So that's the labor market, the economy perspective. So the businesses maybe could change. I'm not sure, but it could be. So maybe the availability of international migrants actually has prevented or hindered the innovation and the changes in our labor markets. And now, as you see it now in the context of the Ukraine crisis, that we all of a sudden are able to speed up our production of renewable energy now that we try to boycott the traditional energy export or import from Russia. So all of us, if it's not available anymore or less available, it's easier to change things. So that could be a thought. Another thing that Apostolos, in fact, brought up, so I'm not sure if I'm messing your plans up, is in terms of international migration and our openness to receive refugees. A future question could be why our attitude towards some refugees is much more positive than towards others. And it's so incredibly unfair although I'm very in favor of welcoming Ukrainian refugees, but I think we should also receive other refugees as well. And I think it's very unfair that, how we do that nowadays. And I don't know how that works. I don't know if someone else knows, but maybe it could be a future question. If I may end with a sort of more philosophical one, maybe, or a more general one. I think current global challenges like population decline, global climate change, energy transition, all that stuff may increase spatial inequalities between urban and rural, between core and periphery, between countries. But it might also change the whole structure that we now think is normal in terms of center and periphery and stuff like that, because we don't know where the new renewable energy will be produced or who will profit, or how we will deal with climate refugees, or whether some regions will be given up because of climate change. And this will impact maybe our current division in core and periphery. And I'm really wondering, that was my question to Anna, why we still approach population decline in some very peripheral rural regions in Europe as a problem. Why can we not just give these areas back to nature and, you know, help these few people that still live there to find a living somewhere else, and then it's solved?
Thank you. All right, I'll try to throw some ideas, and the people who spoke before me, I think they made a lot of points, but I'm not trying to recapitulate the discussion. I'm going to say some things. One of the issues, and we've started, when we started this project to discuss about spatial justice, the majority of us who work in this project started from scratch, trying to think over and understand what is spatial justice, what is to be added with spatial in front of justice. And there was always the issue whether social justice is part of spatial justice, and in what way. In my understanding, social is part of spatial. It cannot be dissociated from spatial, but it's another way of speaking about justice, taking into account space. But then the issue was how to operationalize this concept. And then we've dealt with many problems and limitations of our analysis when we try to address the issue of spatial justice in terms of operationalizing specific, finding specific indicators. And the issues of justice are highly, in the majority, highly contextualized in terms of space, in terms of nation state, in terms of localities, in various ways. And then there is the problem of the scale coming into the discussion. And we always, I think, that in the discussions I just tried to think over, we always try to say that we need to balance between normative and analytical aspects. But the issue is what kind of normative we are after, whether we are trying to be normative and analytic without being normative political, because always the issue of justice brings into the question the issue of political and the politics, not the policies, the politics. Of course, policies are part and parcel of politics. But in Harvey's thinking, difference is a very important part of spatial justice, and to be fair with difference, social and spatial difference, that's an important aspect. But it doesn't resolve the issue of how to address the issue of difference, and migration is an issue at stake all the times, because it's always difference in society and difference in space. That's why migration, I think, informs very much, at least as far as I'm concerned, the issue of justice. It's a way to understand the process. And the important thing there is that the justice is always postponed as an issue to be resolved by the political actions of different groups. And the issue is whether this kind of spontaneous or a kind of power symmetry or asymmetry to be resolved and find a way towards spatial justice, whether this should be left unresolved and be left there to be resolved in the actual society. And I think the main question behind that is whether we can justify why we speak about spatial justice and how we justified it. And I think it's not enough to justify it only on moral grounds. Otherwise, we speak about only political philosophy, which is either one way of thinking or another. It's not an issue, I understand, an issue of morality only. It has to do with how societies and how social groups within them are going about the issues and how they perceive the issues and how they try to resolve the issues. So I think this has a lot to do with how we justify in our minds and in the minds of the social actors why justice is a solution or might be a possible solution for issues. So I would like to balance between morality and social capacity. I don't know if social capacity is the right term. The capacity of societies to be just and not only to be based on moral basis, ethical justification of justice. What's the impact? What's the impact of spatial justice? Whether we should also think about who is bearing the impact of spatial justice and whether people are about to bear this impact, because it's not easy to be addressed, and it has a cost. Since we think that justice will ideally resolve our issues, I think they always have to deal with the costs of applying spatial justice. And who is going to bear the cost? So this brings us back to the state, the locality, and things like that. And I think there is a lot of discussion about localities and about spatial entities, but I think there is a lot about fetishization of these spatial entities most of the times, because in their name, specific social actors enact, take decisions and things like that. So I'm not, in my mind, settled that spatial justice is the proper way to go about, but the condition there is whether this is a kind of democratic or collective claim or not. Maybe, and to the extent that it's only a rhetorical claim, it's not enough. And I think I will stop there.
And so finally to Lionel, welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me a few minutes to discuss the possible extensions of the Imajine project. From my point of view, Imajine has enabled significant progress about our knowledge of territorial inequalities and how to implement the concept of spatial justice at the European level. Moreover, an appreciable element of this project was to combine the results from different approaches and different scientific disciplines. And now I will focus on extensions which concern the questions on which I worked on this project, namely the effectiveness of the cohesion policy to reduce development disparities, and also about the urban-rural divide. I will quickly develop two possible extensions which I think to be important for the future. The first is a need for better data, more precise in the nature of the project financed by the cohesion policy, but also more precise in the location of the project, which is ongoing in the DG region. But we have to better data to appreciate, to measure inequalities along several dimensions. For example, individual, intertemporal, I mean social mobility, for example, or income, life satisfaction, and so on, outside service and EU-SILC or European Value Survey. And the second point is the need of new methods, new approaches to assess specific points regarding the effectiveness of the cohesion policy. In particular, to address the role of local government and the success of development policies. These two extensions seems to me to be a necessary condition for the reforms of this policy to be really based on evidence-based results and not just on grand theories or grand concepts. The first point concerns the need for better data. I mean to systematize or diversify what was started by the Imajine project. I am thinking, for example, of the work of Anna and her colleagues to produce inequality indicators on a thinner spatial scale, but also perceived well-being surveys, which is a valuable barometers for public action. Regarding indicators of inequality, on way to generalize things would be to obtain access on individual fiscal data for some member states. For some states, these data are already made available to researchers via securing access to servers which contains multiple individual data source with a location of individual. It's an important concern for this database. And this kind of environment allow to match a large quantity of data. Another possible and even more pragmatic solution is to generalize the use of indirect sources of measure of the level of local wealth, such as by interpreting data from Google Street, for example, through the price of parked cars in the street or the general shape of housing. So it's an interesting indirect source of wealth at a final spatial scale. An effort would also be necessary to obtain access to information about the beneficiaries of the cohesion policy with a more precise location, but also better information on the nature of the projects which subsidize. This information will make it possible to generalize more informative microeconometric analysis for local decision makers. And regarding my second point, need for better methods. In recent years, we have seen the emergence of the application of causal inference methods to identify the effect of the cohesion policy. If their use of this method is crucial in order to build evidence-based policies, these results relate mainly to the average effect on employment or regional GDP. And these average effects are not very informative for local decision makers. So it is therefore necessary to move beyond toward econometric analysis that take better account of the role of the effect of contextual analysis on the effectiveness of this policy. What is true on average for a particular specific European regions is not true for specific regions or type of regions. Very recent methodological advance in machine learning, causal machine learning, will quickly fill this gap. Other outcomes will have to be considered more in line than GDP, with what it expects for a cohesion policy. The fundamental question is how much the well-being or the quality of life of European citizens is affected by the cohesion policy. To these questions, Imajine provides the first answers, but it will be necessary to go further by combining causal inference with more qualitative outcomes. This will go through a better interaction between case studies and econometric analysis. And I think our collective multi-approach is an advantage to be exploited on this type of questions in the coming year. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And I'm just going to finish now with this. So let me just note it down. So we've come to the end of the day, and I'd like to thank all participants, but I just want to finish this last slide because we discussed a little bit here about where we go next for Imagine, and we've had far too many conversations we've not been able to complete today and questions which might come up. So the question of how we continue this. One of the last outcomes we have to deliver on Imagine is to think about how we continue this and launch what we refer to as a European network for spatial justice. So we're just going to close the day by launching this. So this is potentially a way of us continuing our research interest and our conversations on this line. So this is intended to be a virtual network of researchers, practitioners, policymakers who are interested in questions of spatial justice, continuing these discussions with also colleagues in Cosmo and Local, another project, and ongoing projects which are emerging potentially around this. We hope that this may develop different ways, at least sharing research, sharing good practice, looking to hold some webinars to do that, potentially developing sessions at academic conferences, and we have been looking into, although the timing hasn't been right for this, the prospect of maybe potentially looking for funding for networking activities from other sources. So we are now putting this out as a way, continuing this conversation. We'll circulate this information again to everyone who's registered for this event today, and there is a sign up sheet, registration link again, which will circulate to people to sign up for that. So I hope that you will participate in that, and that will become a vehicle for continuing the kinds of issues we've been discussing today. But can I just finish by thanking everyone. Thank you for all for attending today and everyone's spoken today. Thank you to our hosts at the Polish Academy of Sciences. Thank you particularly to Dennis and Konrad and Tomasz as the Imagine team here for, again, helping to organise this event today, and Cara for supporting it technically. But also, I think, particularly to thank all of my Imagine colleagues, whether you've spoken today or not, and whether you're here in person or virtually, for your contributions over the last 5 years. I think we've greatly enjoyed the experience of working together. We've learned from each other of bringing together these different disciplines and our different approaches. And as we've found today, I think there's a great deal more to take forward, and I look forward to continuing, I hope, to work with many of you in the future. But thank you again.